Alright, yo dudes. Today I'm going to be continuing the series of adding Marvel Rivals characters that I personally want into the game. Obviously with my own kits, my own ideas. If you disagree with any of it or you want a character to be seen next time, go ahead and leave it down in the comments below. I've actually got a couple suggested today that I can't wait to show off. Today we're going to be showing off 5 strategists. But before we get into them, real quick, do me a solid, head on down, hit that like and that sub button. We're trying to get monetized by the end of the year and I'd really appreciate your help. But I'm going to stop wasting your time. Let's get on to our first kit.
Spider-Man wasn't attacking the city. He was trying to save it. That's slander.
It is not. I resent that. Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
You don't trust anybody. That's your problem.
I trust my barber.
Now real quick, before we get into JJ's kit, I just want to say this one is a little bit more comedic and obviously would never be actually added to the game, as by picking JJ, you then choose to ruin any Spider-Man player's life. For his primary fire, we have the Bugle of Justice. Now I made Jonah's primary fire the Daily Bugle itself. But anyway, upon using his primary fire, he shoots out sound waves that heal allies and damage enemies. Additionally, it'll also ricochet off walls 1 time. Onto his secondary fire, we have Breaking News. This is where JJ throws a newspaper bundle and anyone he hits is blinded, but not like how Cloak blinds people. Just a comical newspaper is thrown over their screen, kind of like the old ink blots from Mario Kart. For his first ability, we have Flash Photography. This is where JJ pulls out a camera, charges up the flash, and unleashes a cone of light in front of him that stuns enemies for a moment. Now I would love for this to take a comical photo that will be shown off in his MVP animation, but I don't know how realistic that would be to do. For his second ability, we have Anti-Spider Rounds. This is where JJ pulls out a straight up gun that he personally developed so that it can track Spider-Man's DNA. Now these bullets are nearly impossible to miss. Obviously if you shoot them while your face is against a wall, then they will hit the wall. And Spider-Man can swing around fast enough that he actually could dodge them, which could make for a pretty cool cinematic shot in my opinion. But upon activating this ability, your primary fire switches to a gun. You have 8 shots that will all track Spider-Man if he's within your view. If Spider-Man is not in your view, then the bullets will go straight upwards and find him wherever he is on the map. If there is no Spider-Man on the map, then they just travel forward like normal bullets. For his third ability, we have Bugle Blast. This allows Jonah to blare out a note that knocks enemies away and will also push himself back, allowing him to create distance between someone if he's getting dove by a certain menace. Moving on to his passive, we have Web Repellent. While Jonah has the webbed effect on him, all of his attacks auto-lock onto Spider-Man, meaning if he throws his newspaper, it will go directly upwards and follow Spider-Man. Onto his ultimate, we have Spider Slayers. In this universe, Jonah can hit Q to summon 2 Spider Slayers that'll follow him around and auto-target Spider-Man or any character if Spider-Man's not within the range or line of sight. Kind of like Bob from Overwatch, but he has 2 of them that float around him. If an ally gets the webbed effect, that's what happens when Spider-Man hits you with his little web shot, then one of the Slayers will immediately dash over to guard them. If Spider-Man ever gets within 5 meters of the Slayer or the person the Slayer is guarding, then it will dash forward, grabbing Spider-Man and holding him still for a couple seconds, allowing your team to capitalize and usually kill him. If Spider-Man is either not picked or not within range, then the Slayers will just simply stay behind Jonah and continue to shoot allies and enemies, healing and damaging for the entire duration. Now for JJ's cosmetics, I couldn't really think of too much that I wanted for him. Obviously, I'd love a J.K. Simmons skin. It'd be really funny to have a Omni-Man skin. And for those of you that went around for my first Vanguard video where I did Conquest, I would also personally love for J. Jonah Jameson to have an Omni-Man themed skin, since J.K. Simmons voices both characters. Other than that, maybe just some anti-Spider-Man skins would be fun, or simple stuff like that. But with JJ done, it's time to clear the stage for our next strategist.
Make it come brighter. How you love me is on fire. Turn our lights out, taking me higher.
Now, as suggested by you guys, I decided to throw Dazzler in as a strategist. The original comment asked for her to be a duelist, but with the sheer amount of duelists in the game, I always like to try to make tanks or strategists first. But onto her primary fire, we have Photobiotic Rays. This is where she fires out semi-automatic light rays from her nails, or her fingertips depending on the skin. I would make this have a fairly deep magazine. You would be able to fire it much quicker, granted at lower healing per shot. Onto her secondary fire, we have Photogenic Spear. This is where Dazzler makes a spear of light around her arm and then fires it out, pinning an enemy for a moment and knocking them back. Now if they hit a wall, then they're pinned for even longer and they take some bonus damage. For her first ability, we have Silent Dome. This is where she makes a little ball out of light and hurls it like a snowball, and wherever it lands, it generates into a massive area where no sound exists inside, and allies gain some passive healing. Additionally, the dome is made out of light, so no one can see in from the outside. I can kind of see this working as a way to hide an ultimate. Say Star-Lord's ulting, he can go into this bubble, ult, no one knows his voice line's activated, and then he can fly out the top and gun people down. Onto her second ability, we have Backup Dancers. This is where Dazzler summons two tiny little light constructs that look sort of like ballerinas to dance beside her and passively shoot out little light beams that heal allies. So essentially they're little healing turrets that follow her around and will target the person with the least amount of health. These last for a certain amount of time and then they're dispelled and the cooldown would start. Onto her third ability, we have Glow Baby. This is where Dazzler grants an ally a floating ball of light that will float just barely beside their shoulder and fire a pulse of light whenever they hit an enemy, adding essentially roughly 40 damage onto it since it's a hit scan attack that happens immediately after you hit your primary fire button. Now this does have a set amount of uses, so you can only shoot, I'd say, roughly 5 to 8 shots with this additional 40 damage, and then the light disappears and returns to Dazzler's hip. Onto her passive, we have Sonic Absorption. This is where Dazzler absorbs the sound around her and weaponizes it. This allows her to auto-lock with all of her abilities immediately after a ultimate sound effect is played, meaning if Star-Lord screams legendary, now not only is he locking onto enemies, but also Dazzler is for a short time. But she could also lock on with her photogenic spear to kind of spear Star-Lord out of the air if she wanted to. But moving on to her ultimate, we have Symphony of the City. This is where Dazzler starts to dance similarly to Luna, but during her ult she can either blind enemies that look at her for too long, or she can swap to healing around allies. I think you'd be using healing most of the time, but I'd love to add just a little bit of extra utility onto her ultimate to differentiate it from just having Luna's ult. Additionally, the blinding effect would only come into play if an enemy has their crosshair too close to Dazzler, essentially making it so that you could target her, but then you'll be blinded. Essentially meaning you can target her, but you'll be blinded fairly quickly. I'd actually love to see this ultimate kind of work how I believe Beta Luna's ultimate worked, where you could switch really fast between the two. Only difference is, for Dazzler, I'd like to see her strategically switching between healing and light in order to blind, say, a Magneto about to dunk her shit. Then she can blind the Magneto, quickly move, and Magneto could miss. Or Iron Man, or any other DPS that would want to try to one-shot you. As far as her cosmetics, they're really endless, honestly. Dazzler has the ability to change her outfit on a whim since she controls the light particles, since she controls the photons around her, allowing her to essentially change her outfit in the blink of an eye. So I'd actually love to see Dazzler get an emote that would randomly swap between cosmetics that you actually own. I think that would be cool. Other than that, I have really no ideas for any specific costumes. I just know that it could be essentially endless. All right, with Dazzler done, let's move on to our next star.
And just so that we're both perfectly clear, you will never take this helmet from me.
Now moving on to Nova, I decided to go with Richard Rider because I feel like he's very underrepresented in most mainstream media. The only Nova I'm very aware of is the animated series with Amazing Spider-Man that I just showed on screen. That was my first interpretation of Nova, and that's Sam Alexander. But whichever Nova it is, I just really like to see Nova. Now I tried to differentiate Nova's character here from Captain Marvel because I am going to be using her in a future Vanguard's kit if you guys have any suggestions. And I feel like I did a fairly good job staying true to his character while also giving him his own identity away from her. Now getting into Nova's primary fire, we have Nova Spears. This is where Nova fires a pulse of light that heals and damages, piercing through both allies and enemies. For his secondary fire, we have Cosmic Bombs. This is where Nova conjures massive bombs of cosmic energy that explode on impact, dealing heavy damage or healing, and leave a fallout on the ground that will passively heal allies but does nothing to enemies. For his first ability, we have Hyperspace Portals. This is where Nova coats himself in energy and dashes forward, vanishing off the map through a portal, similar to how Magic looks when she uses her shift. However, during this time, Nova not only passively heals himself, but also enters a Doctor Strange-style portal view. While in this view, he doesn't exist anywhere on the map and cannot be targeted, but there is a limited amount of time until he is forced to exit through another hyperspace tunnel as he reappears onto the map wherever he is currently viewing. Now that was a mouthful, But essentially I gave him Magic's Shift, but he can reappear wherever he wants within a certain time period. It would just be a couple of seconds. I don't think it could cross the whole map. Onto his second ability, we have Radiant Expulsion. This rapidly depletes your passive, which we'll get to in a moment, and heals everyone around you a crazy amount. Now because of that, I'm going to go ahead and explain your passive, Nova Force. This is a resource that allows Nova to use his abilities and fly. Now flying around naturally does not deplete this resource at all, but using abilities outside of your primary fire will use some of this, and if you ever hit 0, then you hit the ground until you're back at 100. It would recharge fairly quickly, and would recharge even faster if you're healing allies or damaging enemies. In other words, the more that you contribute, the faster your Nova Force will recharge. But back to Radiant Expulsion, it would quickly burn out your Nova Force, but it would heal everyone around you a crazy amount, so you would be essentially useless afterwards, but it could really save your team in a pinch. For his third ability, we have Starfall. This is where Nova forms a disc of light and throws it forward, slowly floating forward as it drops little stars onto the ground that would heal allies if they pick them up, and if they're at full health, then it would give them overshields. This would work very similarly to Rocket's armor packs, however they would not stack. Onto his ultimate, we have Shielding Comet. This is where Nova coats himself in energy one more time, but instead of going into a hyperspace tunnel, he instead flies around like Iron Man, completely immune to all damage and CC, while leaving a trail behind him that heals allies and blinds enemies that walk through it. I could see this ability being used to counter Magneto ultimates, so that as he's about to dunk down, you can activate yours and fly through his dunk in order to destroy the ball without actually harming anyone. Additionally, the trail behind him can go vertical into the air, so he could even heal his flyers and set up a little area up there where they can have their own little cloak and dagger ultimate. If this sounds familiar, that's because this is fairly similar to the ultimate that I gave Falcon in my first Strategist video, which if you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend it. It got a lot of Duelist players upset. But the reason that I decided to make this ultimate fairly similar to Falcon's is because I will be reworking his kit as a Vanguard fairly soon. As far as cosmetics though, I feel like there is so much you can do with the Nova Force really being anyone. You could have him change species, you could have him change into the Sam Alexander version, and you could give him that black helmet that Sam Alexander gets after the scene that we watched for his intro. Let me know in the comments down below, those of you more familiar with Nova, what cosmetics you'd like to see. Alright, with Nova complete, let's move on to the strategist that I am most excited for, and my personal favorite one-eyed Samuel L. Jackson character.
I know you erased my password. Probably deleted my retinal scan. But if you want to stay ahead of me, Mr. Secretary, you need to keep both eyes open.
Alright, for Nick Fury, I bounced around what he could be a lot, and in all reality, he could be any of these roles. Nick Fury's biggest thing is essentially prep time. With him being the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he could really just have any technology that allows him to be a Vanguard or a Duelist or a Strategist, but I feel like it aligns with his character the best to make him into a Strategist who kind of calls the shots for the rest of your team. For his primary fire, we have Meta Rifle. This is a modified hit scan rifle designed by S.H.I.E.L.D. to heal allies and hurt enemies. Fairly simple, but would be very similar to Punisher's rifle. Onto his secondary fire, we have Grenade Attachment. This allows Nick to fire off a grenade from his rifle that explodes, dealing a lot of damage with a direct impact, but it'll leave a fog like Punisher smoke. However, allies in this fog are not only obscured, but they will also passively heal. Now onto my favorite ability, and his first ability, we have Direct Order. This is where Fury commands an ally of his choice, granting them a substantial buff depending on their role. Tanks gain 200 overshields, DPS gain a damage buff, and healers gain a healing buff. This will only last for 6 to 8 seconds, and he would have several uses of this alongside a cooldown. I see it working like Mantis's leaves, but obviously role-based effects instead of the basic ones Mantis has. Onto his second ability, we have Shield Deployment. This is where Nick places a shield projector that can be rotated in any direction. It will block incoming damage, and the shield has a separate health bar than the projector, meaning you can break the shield and a couple seconds later it'll recharge and pop back up if you don't destroy the projector. However, wherever the shield is facing will naturally block the projector as well. This is my way of making a shield support that isn't as broken as Brigida was, since you'd have to pick where this sits, and then you could destroy it like a penny nest to move it anywhere you want, but rotating it is completely free. And it would rotate depending on where Nicholas is looking. Onto his third ability, we have Long Shot. This is where Fury pulls off a massive sniper rifle off of his back. Now this would deal insane damage. I'm talking Widowmaker from Overwatch damage. However, he only has one shot, and then he has to put it away for a very long cooldown. So I would allow this ability to one-shot with a headshot, and if you don't hit a headshot, severely wound most squishies, or if you're unfamiliar with the term, anyone with 250 to 300 health, I believe, is considered a squishy. So basically anyone not a tank. Now after the shot is fired, Nick puts this away and goes back to his normal primary fire, and this would go on cooldown for, I'd say, maybe 10 to 15 seconds, maybe more, maybe less, I don't know. One-shots are always scary to add to a game, but I feel like adding it under an ability like this gives strategists a little bit more power and a little more say-so if there's a flyer who's really pestering the shit out of you like Iron Man, especially if you can actually hit your shots. Onto his passive, we have Shield Director. This comes into effect every time Fury uses his direct order that we talked about earlier. Anytime he buffs an ally, he also gains that buff, meaning if he uses his direct order on a tank, the tank gains 200 over shields, and so does Nick Fury. He gains a DPS buff when the DPS do, and he would gain a healing buff if he gives a healing buff to Luna Snow, for example. Now, I could technically see this giving him more sustain than some tanks like Thor, but that's more a problem with Thor than it is with Nick Fury. This would allow Fury to use this defensively as well as offensively, meaning if he's getting dove, he can use direct order to give tanks 200 shields in the front line and give himself 200 shields so he can deal with the Black Panther or the Spider-Man. If they're bugging you, then you can get extra HP to really deal with them and mess up some of their combos. Onto his ultimate ability, we have Project Insight. This is where Nick calls in a helicarrier that rains down a bombardment of healing and damage in an area he selects. Now during this time, Nick can hit Q again to move the area wherever he's aiming. This does have a cooldown, but he could maybe do this 2, maybe 3 times during his ultimate before it disappears. Because of this, it would have less healing than, say, Invisible Woman's ultimate, so that it doesn't just become a better version of Invisible Woman's ultimate. I see this as a pressure-based ultimate, not a saving ultimate. So you wouldn't pop this if you're going to die, but instead to maybe force the enemy team to back off, and then as they're backing off, you continue to push it forward onto them, forcing them to back up more. And with Nick Fury finalized, let's get into our final strategist of the day.
All right, fine, show me what you got, but it better be cool.
How's this hot stuff?
Now when making this She-Hulk kit, I actually started out as a Vanguard for her. And I've always had this concept of using similar characters to branch out into other roles. So I decided to take Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk, and make her into a Hulk-inspired kit for strategists, making her into what I feel like would be one of the most fun strategists. Then again, I play Hulk, so maybe I'm a little biased here. Either way, Jennifer Walters here, I tried to make into a bit more of a brawl-themed strategist, making her into obviously an off healer, not a main healer, but I guess I should let you decide that yourselves. With her primary fire, Gamma Blow. This would be a very similar punching primary fire to Hero Hulk's Heavy Blow. However, I like to see She-Hulk use a bit more finesse with hers, since she's fully in control, whereas during the Hulk, Banner is just a rampaging monster. For secondary fire, we have Regeneration Beam. Along She-Hulk's outfit, I'd like to have some technology around her gloves that allows her to shoot out a beam that would track allies and heal them passively, and maybe even creates a small little area around that ally that would also heal other characters near that ally. Onto our first ability, we have Gamma Emission. A toggle ability. This is a toggling ability, similar to what we've seen from Blade with his vampire form. Once flicked on, it stays on until you turn it off. And during this time, she drains her passive to emit a powerful AoE of healing. Now I'll go ahead and get into her passive, Radiation Buildup. Now Jen has a meter on her screen that goes up whenever she deals damage. Now depending on the meter's charge, it will buff all of her healing abilities. Now this does not trickle down over time unless she is using Gamma Emission. But with that out of the way, let's move on to her second ability, Legal Lunge. The name doesn't really mean too much, I just wanted to work in that she's a lawyer. This is where Jen lunges forward, grabs an enemy, and hurls them like the fastball special. Tanks included, just not the thing. With an extra stun and additional damage if she throws them directly into a wall. I see this as a bit more of like a backline helping ability or even a space taking ability, where you can dash forward like Emma Frost, grab Spider-Man, and immediately start charging up your throw and launch them. I will say this is not like the fastball special where you can hold them as long as you want and then hurl them. It's only themed to like the fastball special because you can see the meter charging up, and once it hits the top, they automatically throw. You just have until then to aim where you'd like to be, maybe 1 or 2 seconds max. Onto her third ability, we have Sensational Spring. This is just Hulk's jumping ability that She-Hulk also has access to, but wherever she lands, she has a small burst of AoE healing if her passive is charged above 50%. Onto her ultimate, we have Controlled Monster. This is where She-Hulk constantly generates her passive, allowing her to keep her emissions going constantly. During this time, you can also hit Q again to clap your hands together and send a pulse of gamma energy out that heals allies a great amount and destroys any projectiles that it crosses through. Now, it does have a certain HP threshold and then also has to recharge during your ultimate. As far as cosmetics for She-Hulk, like I said for my Daredevil kit, I would love to see a lawyer-themed skin for her, maybe where she has a briefcase. Now, this would be the only time that I think I've ever said this, but please, for the love of God, do not give us an MCU adaptation skin. Let me forget about it. Alright, with Jen out of the way, let's get into our Strategists team-ups. For Jonah, I decided to give him the Anti-Spidey Fan Club, where JJ anchors and Ultron can activate this brand new ability for him that would have his primary fire auto-lock onto Spider-Man. This would be insanely busted having Ultron auto-lock along with all of his movement abilities, but it's Spider-Man, so who cares? Now for Dazzler, I made her team up Musical Mutants, where Dazzler and Luna have a mutual team up. Technically, I guess you'd say Dazzler is anchoring, but really either one can anchor here. But I would honestly prefer Dazzler to anchor because Luna does not need the healing buff. This team up only ever comes into play when either of these two use their ultimate. While Luna is ulting, Dazzler can jump in and apply her blinding effect on top of Luna's ultimate. Or if Dazzler is ulting, then Luna can jump in and add her damage boost effect on top of Dazzler's ultimate. Now trust me, before anyone says it in the comments, I am more than aware that Luna Snow does not need this buff. But in a perfect world where Luna Snow is not the god king of all strategists, and instead is fairly balanced along with the other ones, then I feel like this team up would just gently push her up into being a significantly better character, but in the state that she's currently in, this would just simply make her absolutely busted. But hey, so the same guy that gave a team up for Magneto that removes his limiter and makes it to where you can't explode it, while also making the damage constantly scale up. If you haven't seen my mutant video, go check it out. It's very cool. I actually did a Jean Grey kit before Jean even came out. And in my opinion, it's actually better than the one that Marvel Rivals came out with. Though I guess you can't really do too much worse than just having Hela have fire abilities. Anywho, moving on to our next team up, we have Nova with Intergalactic Space Buds. This is where Nova anchors, and Adam gains an activatable flight ability, turning him into a flying character. Now during this flight, he can hit the same button, I believe it would be C, or whatever it is on controller, I don't know, and he would be able to activate an increased flight mode, sort of like what we see in his MVP animation or in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Additionally, during the time that Nova is using his ultimate, Adam automatically gains this flight free of charge. Now I personally love Nick Fury's team up because it is the Avengers. This is where Nick Fury anchors and the rest of the Avengers and gains an ability dependent on their role. Now the Avengers are 3 tanks and 3 DPS, which would make Nick Fury a 7th. So this team up is technically between 7 people. So throwing Nick in the mix, you'd have to drop one of the OG Avengers. Most likely at this point, I would honestly say either Black Widow or Thor. But either way, during this time, Hulk, Thor, and Cap each can hit their button to instantly gain 200 overshields. During this time, they also gain a slight damage boost. And for the DPS characters in this roster, they can activate their ability to gain a slight damage boost and have their primary fires also deal healing, basically turning Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Iron Man into strategists for about 8-ish seconds. I think it's an interesting way to have an Avengers team up. Makes sense as to why the 3 tank, 3 DPS roster, why 3 tanks and 3 DPS would actually work as a fairly good team. And that's because they work together to fill up the roles that aren't actually there, even though Nick Fury is a strategist and technically would be solo healing whenever the DPS aren't using that ability. But still, I think it's interesting. It could use some tweaking. I'd love to hear your ideas in the comments as to how this could be worked out differently. And for our final team up from She-Hulk, we have Hulks United. This is where Jen anchors, and Bruce gains a new ability, allowing him to utilize her regeneration beam while not the Hulk, essentially turning Bruce into a strategist if he drops out of the Hulk form. While in his Hulk form, allies will passively regain HP while in his gamma bubbles. Those are 5 more strategists that I would like added to Marvel Rivals that I made kits for. If you haven't seen my previous video on strategists, I tried to get pretty creative with it as I did in this one, and turn characters you might not have expected into strategists, especially with Miles Morales. I don't think anyone expected that one. But But either way, I hope you all enjoyed. If there's a character you want to see next time or a kit you think I could have done differently, let me know in the comments down below. I love hearing your guys' ideas, and I will always try to work them in whenever I can. Now, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!